Welcome to episode 2 of the Dr. Stephen Greer podcast. My name is Michael Mazzola. I'm a filmmaker who has collaborated many times with Dr. Greer, and I'll be asking a few questions. Dr. Greer, why don't we kick off with the big news that is breaking right now?
Sure, and thanks, Michael. I've spoken for some time about a group of people who have worked at black sites out west in sensitive operations, where I visited those sites. The leader of that team has come forward. He had a little cameo on News Nation yesterday. That would be Wednesday. That was talking about his involvement with the crash retrieval operations and what have you. There will be more that will be coming out Saturday on that same show with Ross.
So tell me about the moment when you realized that you were involved in a retrieval of non-human technology, alien tech.
So it became very clear the first time our communication process and procedure was modified. And then just visually looking at the object on the ground, you could tell that it was extraordinary and anomalous. It was not human.
What people need to understand is that this has evolved a lot in the last 2 months. As of this past summer, that individual, Jake Barber, and his team, as well as people from other sites, were working with him. We're going to just collect a lot of the evidence of the crashes, the bodies, the retrievals, the man-made craft, hand them over, and we put it out publicly. Then they decided to do it through some government process with an office called DOPSR, which clears things that are going to be written and released at the Pentagon, DOPSR. You can look it up. Another one of those alphabet soup acronyms in the government, which are endless. But those are the ones who review what something you're going to print or release that's of a top secret nature. And then also they decided to unmask themselves. I've talked about this in the last month or two, that this was a very big development, a very good development, that instead of it being an anonymous drop of information and intelligence and images without provenance, because this happens all the time in my situation. Someone wants to remain anonymous, they give me information, but I can't point to where it came from. Which, of course, people then say, well, maybe Dr. Greer got that from some unreliable source, or it's not legitimate. So in this case, their bona fides are extremely high. They're going to be established in terms of their long-term involvement with these operations, decades. And the other part of it that's very exciting is that because they're naming themselves, they're adding the credibility of having been there and are currently boots on the ground at these facilities, right? It's not like they were there in the 60s or 80s or something. These are current operations from firsthand people who are operational there, who have been special forces and and embedded with corporate activities at the Lockheed Skunk Works and Northrop Grumman and what have you. That's really quite a major development. Now, the evidence that exists is way vaster than what you're going to see Saturday. It's going to come out in parts over the next couple of months. And a lot of this is strategic on their part to see, how does the public handle it? What does the media do with it? And more importantly, what pushback and dangers are there coming back to them from rogue elements of government programs, whether it be law enforcement or other activities. And we've talked about this before. Mr. Grush said this under oath at the House last year, that there have been people killed. And we know this. There have been people I've been associated with that have been killed. So this is a delicate situation, because it's one thing if you do it anonymously, it passes through a couple individuals into my hands and we disclose it, which has happened for 30 some years. Information, in the case some documents, images, stuff like this. It's in our archive, dpiarchive.com. Go and see. There's a huge cache of stuff there that no one's looked at yet. But when you're naming yourself and you're operational and you're in a program where let's just say if you become too problematic, people tend to be erased or arrested or harassed or what have you. So that changed everything 2 months ago. And they are running their algorithm to their own OPSECs, operational security needs. And of course, I'm very much cooperating with that. So my intention as the founder of the Global Disclosure Project 30 years ago is to be sure that they are safe and try to get this information to the widest audience, but more importantly, also gauge from the connections that we have on my team inside the incoming administration and the current members of Congress, how that's going over and what the appetite is for supporting a path out of these illegal secret programs, or is it going to push back and shut down further? So in a sense, what's coming initially is sort of testing the waters, poking the bear, and putting up trial balloons, if this makes sense to people. And that's a rational approach when you're going from releasing things anonymously through a whole huge network that we have versus doing it where your name, rank, serial number, who you are, your whole identity is known to the public. That is a horse of a very different color, my friends. So that is why it really went through this whole metamorphosis since we first began talking about this. Now, keep in mind, I've known this gentleman, Jake Barber, and people on his team for about 20 months, 19, 20 months now, when they first reached out. And I've seen a beautiful evolution from being completely in the shadows to wanting to move and cooperate with disclosing certain information, but it would have been anonymously, to now coming out fully, which is much more powerful. But it's also riskier. So, there are these trade-offs, and that's why I'm trying to give people some context to understand that. And I think what we all need to do, who are concerned with the truth and a future that is peaceful and a future that involves wonderful new technologies to reboot human civilization on a sustainable path, is to protect these folks and to be sure that we recommend to our elected leaders that they institute the protections that we've been recommending for decades. I mean, if you go into our archive, you'll see that in my correspondence with Bill Clinton, President Clinton, back in the 94-5 time range, after I briefed his CI director, every one of those executive order recommendations that were present then are present now in the briefing document for the incoming president, as well as past presidents that we've dealt with. At this time, it looks like there's a very positive development in that regard, because last night, quite late, and I know I called Michael right away, I got 4 executive order drafts from a source I cannot name that pretty much goes through that. I mean, it literally, one of them, Executive Order 1, is to establish a coordination office on UAPs, UFOs in the White House to get to the bottom of this. And I'm not going to bore you by reading the text, but I have it. The order number 2 is the interagency coordination and having all different agencies coordinate it, and they keep using the word disclosure. Every one of these executive orders mentions the word disclosure. And then there's one that we've been asking for, and that's enhanced protections for the whistleblowers. And it goes into the need to have them protected by all means necessary. And that is something that we have been asking for 30 some years, because remember, if you want to see whistleblower testimony, go to dpiarchive.com. You're going to see, I think, 115, correct me, Raven, if I'm wrong, or so, named people who are already been interviewed, name, rank, and serial number. They're not anonymous, that are in the Disclosure Project collection that I have personally debriefed. Now, I have debriefed close to 1,000. And you can see there are a whole bunch of redacted names that didn't want to come forward publicly, but we already have 115 that are named. And these include people all the way back to the 60s who are still living before they passed away, like Sergeant Clifford Stone, who were on crash retrieval teams. So that has come out before. What's unique here is that there's going to be evidence of those operations, proof of it released also. Now, that puts everything in a different light, because everyone has said for 30 years, the testimony can only take us so far. We need the proof of the operations. We need the proof of the craft. And I've agreed with that. But it's not as if I can force these people to risk their careers and lives to bring those out of a illegally run but top secret operation. And up until now, no one's had the courage to do it. These guys have had the courage to do it, which is an extraordinary development. And it's been an evolution of our relationship and their understanding of this. And they're very supportive of the objectives of disclosure, but they're also very supportive of the idea of reversing the dynamic between humans and extraterrestrials that's now either total denial they exist, or an aggressive, covert, unsupervised, illegal downing, targeting, shooting the craft down with electromagnetic pulse weapons, etc. Now, the team coming forward have been part of those operations and know how they operate, up to and including the weapon systems used. And I have been out there and I've seen the facilities and I've been over the sites where they have downed. One site I was over, 1 or 2 ET craft or NHI craft a year are downed. And I was in Jake Barber's chopper with another Special Forces guy about 15 months ago over that site. So, and there's another site north of there, but both of them are in remote desert locations in the high desert, the Mojave Desert. So those operations are known in great detail by the people on this man's team. How much of that will come out has a lot to do with U.S. government support for these protections, like I just mentioned. And then the fourth one, that is the fourth one. So I don't know, I missed one. I'm not very good at organizing these, but
Black opium glitter, the new marshmallow must success. Yves Saint Laurent.
Yeah. So the other, there are 4. Most of them deal with coordinating offices and researching this and disclosing information. Now, one of them mentions something that I brought up many years ago. Not every bit of the illegal secrecy is unwarranted. The illegal part is totally unwarranted and unconstitutional, but there are certain things that have to be kept secret. And I know many people have wondered why I've said this over the last 30 years. Is because some of these technologies that allow for the man-made craft to go from point A to B at several 100,000 miles per hour, man-made. If that technological capability were released in the current world, where there are terrorist cells, where there are unstable regimes, where there are nations that sponsor terrorism, those technologies would absolutely be turned into a missile delivery system, and it would be catastrophic. So not everything, it can be acknowledged we have them, but let's say the operating system and the designs, those have to be kept secret for a while until humanity gets to some level of collective security. And that brings us to a bigger question. And one of the things that we need to put into the recommendations is that there needs to be an international effort with Russia, America, China, other nation states all over the world to agree, number one, to cease and desist from any aggressive, violent actions against ET craft or their persons. And the second would be to initiate a global peaceful outreach to them. But then there also needs to be a collective security pact where the technologies that are involved in the reverse engineering breakthroughs that have happened, we're going to get into this in a minute because this is the big thing missing out of this whole conversation. The massive breakthroughs in technology, those are all things we have paid for as taxpayers. And those would be the ultimate peace dividend of this sort of secret war that has not been declared openly between these operations being run without supervision illegally and they're targeting the ET craft. Now, many people have wondered why I've said for years that given what we've been doing, if these civilizations were hostile, it'd be over. Because I know what we've been doing. I've known about these operations for over 30 years where we have had targeted, sophisticated electromagnetic pulse weapons and other directional energy weapons that have targeted and downed these craft with loss of life, and I might add, the capture of living ETs that are kept imprisoned underground in certain locations. So that is a fact. The teams that I've been working with who are behind the upcoming disclosures know that. There has to be a rescue effort for those unfortunate people. They're not humans, but they're people. And in many cases, of course, they have been treated very badly and tortured and interrogated. So, and we're talking about the ETs. Now, in light of that, given their technological superiority, which was obvious to anyone with a thinking brain, I mean, when we first started doing this, the whole Roswell thing was an early electromagnetic directional energy weapon that downed those. We were using vacuum tubes. We barely even had jets up flying in 1947. We had never gone into space yet. That was Sputnik in 57. These civilizations, if they were hostile, the proof that they're not is that we are still here. And we are still breathing the free air of Earth. And I have said this many times at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and at the Pentagon. So I think that is what we have to keep. People say, what's the proof of that? I said, the proof is that we're here. But given these technological capabilities, we're talking interdimensional, transdimensional, and interstellar capable. Those civilizations being thousands to hundreds of thousands and perhaps millions of years more advanced than we are technologically, if they had not had a concomitant evolution in consciousness and social and spiritual development, they would have said, see ya, right? That's what we would have done. Humans would have done that if the shoe were on the other foot. So I think we have to have a great deal of patience also with the non-human visitors and not NHI, non-human intelligence, because they have been very, very patient with us in tolerating this aggressive behavior that has resulted in the downing of their craft, the killing of their people, and then the reverse engineering of their technology, which we have then flipped around and used against them, right? That's what reverse engineering is all about. It's to find out how the technology works, but instead of putting it out to the public that would save the biosphere and eliminate poverty in a generation, it's been turned into illegally run secret weapon programs that are targeting the ETs themselves. So this is the truth that, most people aren't going to cut right through the BS, but I'm going to have to do that here because that's what's going on. Now, so I think that all the context of this is these guys coming forward is just the very beginning. And what you're going to see Saturday is the tip of a very big iceberg of evidence and materials that we know about. I'm not in charge of the dates and the way that it's released. I'm advising. We receive as things are going to go out generally, and I'm fine with that because they don't want to put us at any further risk. In the meanwhile, the citizenry, as Eisenhower called us, need to support the disclosure process, but at a very high official level in Congress, internationally, and also in the White House, because the chief executive of the United States is the president, regardless of who you voted for. I've dealt with all of them, and that is that this needs to be a nonpartisan, but only that, more than just a U.S. response. There needs to be China, Russia. They have secret files. They have operations. Those need to begin to come forward there. The United Kingdom. Again, I've met with senior government people there. The top people legally aren't read in, but they have operations there that we've known about for years. So this process going on now in America needs to pick up disclosure globally. Everyone thinks this is only a U.S. issue. It is not. It is a global problem.
Dr. Greer, this is a really important point that I'd like for you to unpack.
Yeah.
There's this very common misunderstanding that, oh, it's the government that's covering this up.
Yeah.
And they conflate the government with this legacy group. And as you've said many times, this legacy group is transnational. And if they want to be the US, they can be the US. If they want to operate as China, they can do that. They could operate as a terror group. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yes, I mean, part of the problem of the unchecked power of a group with this kind of technology and intent, which has not been terribly good, it's been rather a malicious intent over the last 70 years. And Eisenhower warned of this when he said, beware the military-industrial complex and it will be a threat to our democracy and way of life. He knew that because on his watch, unfortunately, the whole matter went sideways. And he basically was betrayed by people he trusted, and they seized the levers of control over these reverse engineering and other operations dealing with UFOs, UAPs, NHI, extraterrestrial, whatever you want to call them. And that happened around the time they had the Eureka moment in October 1954, and we had the breakthrough and had mastered what's called gravity control, the ability to control gravitational fields through very high voltage electromagnetic systems that reach transdimensionally. I'm not going to get into the physics of it. It's understood at the atomic and subatomic level. But that was achieved 1 year before I was born, ironically, or almost a year before I was born. And once they realized what they had, they deepened the secrecy. And folks like Alan Dulles and others pretty much began to push the president, never mind members of Congress, out of oversight. And so that's the way it's been since the late 50s, unfortunately. Most people have this weird idea that just because you're the prime minister of the UK or the president of France or the president of the United States or whoever, that you're read into this sort of parallel secret government infrastructure that's rogue. And they're not. Now, are there people in the U.S. government, even some politicians who are, let's say, on the payroll or tied into that operation? Absolutely, yes. Have there always been? Yes, because you embed those people almost as agents that are embedded to thwart anything that would begin to disclose the truth about that. That's what we encountered. So this is nuanced. I mean, most people say, well, why is the government keeping this secret? I say, well, 90+%, 99% of everybody works in the U.S. government or British government or any other government know nothing about this. If you've seen the film Unacknowledged, you know more about this subject than 90+% of all federal officials here and abroad. Fact. And this is, I've been in so many meetings with members of Senate, House, White House folks, Pentagon, senior Pentagon people. And the idea that just because you have 3 stars or 4 stars, or that you're the president, or you're the CI director, or you're the chair or co-chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, that you have an all-access information on this. It simply isn't true. And this is where that part of this is the hardest thing for both government officials to acknowledge, because no one wants to be the emperor that has no clothes, right? And you're like, well, this is all going on and we don't control it. It's scary. It's scary to those people, and it could be frightening to the general public. But the fact is, that is one of the biggest things that have to be fixed. So these guys coming forward isn't the end of anything. It's the very beginning of another phase of disclosure that's going to require the government of we the people to act to secure the technologies, move the safe ones out, like free energy, quote unquote, 0 point, things that would run your house, your car, your factory with no pollution and no energy bill either, by the way. But control some of the other technologies. That could be a weapon system. That's legit. And then also fix this parallel world of rogue secret government operations who now possess those technologies and who have used them in all kinds of terrifying events. Now, what am I referring to here? Anyone who's ever gone to a UFO conference or seen a documentary, it's replete with all kinds of frightening alien encounters. known as abductions and mutilations and things of this sort. I have met with and debriefed a number of people who have been operational at sites that have manned the man-made UFOs and directed the fake, they look gray, or they're different shapes of fake aliens that have been engaged in this kind of false flag operation. It's a psyop, trying to be sure people are afraid of the aliens, because the long-term agenda that was hatched in the mid-50s was to create this specter of a threat from outer space that would unite the whole world fighting them. That's the meta big agenda that has driven everything else, including all the disinformation on the subject. So as this comes out, one of the biggest tasks we're going to have is managing let's call it the legacy of disinformation and frightening portrayals of NHI, non-human intelligence, with what the truth is. But so far, it's all commingled. And people have had already 70 years of psychological brainwashing and prejudice built in about all things alien. So I think this is something that we can't whistle past that graveyard. It's the biggest problem with disclosure, totally. Is that it's like a prepositioned weapon of mass destruction psychologically that's been embedded in the human awareness for the past 70 years. And remember, we just passed in October of 2024, the 70-year anniversary of us mastering gravity control. And they began to build man-made ARVs, they used to be called alien reproduction vehicles, that looked like a UFO, and then began to realize, well, gee, we can use this in all kinds of skullduggery. This is why we've been trying to get the document from the CIA that Jacques Vallée possesses and some other people possess that says, it's an entry in Jacques Vallée's book from 1992 where he says he has a document where the CIA describes a psychological warfare operation in Brazil and Argentina using these advanced technologies to abduct peasants, their words, abduct peasants, and to create the specter of an alien threat. Now that's in black and white. It's a document.
Com'è fatta una sorpresa Kinder, con tanta attenzione. Tutte le sorprese sono certificate attraverso laboratori esterni indipendenti. Kinder Sorpresa. Bello vederli felici. Scopri di più su kinder.it.
Ai primi sintomi di raffreddore e influenza puoi provare Aspirina C. Aspirina C è qui per te quando serve.
Those are the kinds of documents that we're recommending that law enforcement seize and get, because it will prove what we've been saying for 30 years, that I've been saying for 30 years, is that there's the actual UFOs that are extraterrestrial. They're the man-made ones. And we're going to do this. In a minute, I'm going to go through, if my assistant can pull out some of these images. And we're going to we'll put them up on the screen for people. And that is the contrast between the man-made ones and the fake ones, right? I mean, the real ones and the man-made ones. They look very, very similar superficially, but at close range, they're very different. A man-made one back from the 50s and 60s had rivets and bolts in the interior of the ARV that you see in our archive from the Norton Air Show in 1988, where there was 3 of them in a hangar. Those had components inside them. The witness who was there, Brad Sorensen, he said those were basically Mercury era. So that's late 50s, early 60s. And they had been a little bit of scorch marks. They had been out in our solar system. Now people say this can't be. That's, that's 10 years before we landed on the moon in the lunar module, right? In the Apollo mission. But see, this is 2 separate programs, and never the twain shall meet. Now there are points of contact that are extremely compartmented, but the people running these super secret projects are their own power center. And the unchecked power they have that's risky here, I'm just going to lay this out, always tell people I'm an emergency doctor. If you've got a brain tumor, I ain't going to tell you you've got a migraine. I say, I'm sorry, you got a brain tumor. But in this case, this is a very big risk, and that is organizations and corporations and operations, all here and abroad, that's in this transnational group that doesn't care about boundaries, political boundaries between U.S., China, Russia, and Canada, and whatever. I mean, the whole world is their operating theater of operations. So, and they operate that way, and they can, in one instant, look like they're coming from one country or another. But people haven't figured out yet it's all this same entity, no matter where it's originating. Now, remember that if you're in the 1960-ish range and you've got something that is electrogravitic or gravitic propulsion that was stable enough to go out in our solar system, what do you think they have now, right? 65 years, 2/3 of a century later, because they have continued to down and capture these craft. Trillions have been spent on reverse engineering them, and there have been massive breakthroughs in propulsion, material sciences, AI, not what's coming out of Silicon Valley, but very advanced systems involving consciousness and machine, all manner of developments that sound like science fiction, but it isn't. And now imagine a group that has the malicious intent to hoax a threat from outer space so that they can consolidate global power around fear and control, which is what fear does. Look at the response to COVID and 9/11. It results in people suspending their intellect and their rational mind because the fear overrides the rational intellect. And that's how you get in trouble. But it's also how demagogues and people who are very good at psychological warfare operations can manipulate people into catastrophic events like the disasters of the wars in the Middle East that we're not even extricated fully from yet, in Iraq and Afghanistan, that occurred after 9/11. Probably a really good example of this, which is you can fact check this, is the Gulf of Tonkin incident in the 60s, where we exaggerated and many people believe staged an attack on our own Navy vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, so that it would create an outrage in the public, and the public then demanded action. And it kind of maneuvered President Johnson into vastly expanding the Vietnam War, which, of course, ended up costing hundreds of thousands or millions of lives, if you count the Asian lives, which are humans too, not to mention the 58,000 American men and women who died, but also cost trillions of dollars in today's equivalent U.S. dollars, all of which went to the military-industrial complex. So we have to be aware of the fact that they have the ability to stage many events that look like they are alien, and they are not. And the reason no one can accept that is that they're not willing, in my opinion, to stop and do a deep research and analysis on where trillions of dollars and 70 years with some of the most brilliant minds I've ever met have been working. And you've got the actual functioning ET craft there. Many of them were brought down and they're still operational, right? So under those conditions, you're going to have these huge breakthroughs in research and development and applied sciences that have been very, very kept extremely secret. And when they're kept extremely secret, away from oversight by we the people and our representatives, that's the perfect storm for things getting out of control. And so the big task now for the government, now that this is going to be coming out with more and more proof, evidence, and whistleblowers, and I predict this group, these courageous guys like Jake Barber and others coming forward, will open the floodgates to many, many others, right? So now what? That what we have to look at, now we're at this inflection point where to go forward, the U.S. government can no longer sit on its hands and put its head in the sand like an ostrich. They're going to have to act. but they're going to have to act in a way that benefits humanity and the United States and doesn't just get played into the hands of these master manipulators. The master manipulators will try to maneuver this subject into the false alien threat scenario. But why? Because that's always been their objective. This is why in 1999, I had published a paper called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. It's in our archive. It's on our website, drstephengreer.com. And the reason I wrote that is that I already had discovered about 6-7 years earlier that there was a plan that was already being acted on through some of these psychological warfare programs and scary things in Hollywood and movies about aliens and, staging horrific abductions and mutilations of Catalan people, and that this was all a psyop being run by humans masquerading as alien. Now, that part of this story, no one wants to talk about. They just don't. I mean, people have completely taken it as an article of faith, that mythology. And it's a dangerous mythology because if you accept that as true, then you would say, well, there are these malicious aliens and we should go to war. And there you are. You're back at the movie Independence Day and we're in Armageddon. We're in World War III. That trajectory is the real danger of these disclosures happening if the people can be hoodwinked and fooled again, like the Who said, we won't be fooled again. They wrote that in the early 70s about the Vietnam War. We've been fooled multiple times since. So I would suggest we not be fooled on this one. This is the one that you cannot muck up. And right now, we're at a distinct disadvantage for a couple of reasons. One is that the people in the government who are legally there, who are not read in adequately on this, don't have enough information to make the assessment I just shared. Number two, without the correct assessment, you can't make a plan. In other words, the executive orders that need to be done flow from that body of knowledge and evidence. But you have to master that amount of information before you can reach those conclusions. And then lastly, you have to be able to stand up a law enforcement expeditionary force, an investigation and a force, so that if the people who are provided amnesty say, no, we don't want it, we're going to continue on this path of misusing and abusing these technologies, right? Then those have to be sat down by any means necessary. And that is going to take, we know the team that is ready to do that. I've been briefing them. They're incredibly courageous special forces guys who had not been read into this subject, and we've been providing them with, let's call it actionable intelligence now for about 20 months. And they continue to get more information now that they have known where to look, right? So, but that has to be authorized by the U.S. government. Those guys cannot act unilaterally. So this is where this disclosure needs to be part of an activist program where we, the people, ask the president and the Congress to take these specific acts.
Nuovo trattamento laminazione, il Vita Glycolic Gloss, una trasformazione del capello che dura fino a 10 shampoo.
Acts. Number one, extend full immunity and amnesty to people willing to come forward so that the maximum number of people come forward and it won't be a violent encounter, let's say. Secondly, you have to provide protection for the whistleblowers much stronger than it exists currently, which is in the executive order I just referred to that's going through review currently in the U.S. government. And then on top of it, you've got to be able to put the funding in place to do a proper investigation of the subject that's clean. Now, what do I mean by that? Non-corrupted. The Arrow operations up until very recently, I can't speak for the last few months, there's a new director, have been part of a cover-up, and we can prove this. And the previous director, Dr. Kirkpatrick, I can prove, and I have witnesses who can prove, that testimony, information, data provided to them was covered up, went into a top secret compartment, that the current director doesn't have access to at Arrow, and that was never provided to the oversight committees that set that office up. I know this for a fact. So I have actually said
what sort of information is not allowed to get through, and what is allowed to get through?
Misinformation and spun disinformation gets through. Actual information and hard data and anything that proves that there are human, corporate, and secret government programs that are deep black and illegal having these UAPs themselves, operational, man-made ones, none of that's gotten through. And so this is why you hear people at the Oversight Committee, like Congressman Burchett and people with the Senate, well, everything we're seeing has to be alien, because what else could it be? Well, this is because they've been gaslit, and the people who we brought at our expense, thank you guys who support the Disclosure Project, to Washington, to the Senate Intelligence Committee and Armed Services Committee folks, who then escorted them to Arrow into a top secret skiff, and they provided testimony. All of that went into the black pit of Calcutta. It did not make its way back to the members of Congress and the oversight committees. And that is criminal. That is an illegal fraud being perpetrated on the government and the people who funded the offices. So there is a big problem here, because that office has been set up with the express intention by Senators Gillibrand and others, Armed Services and Senate Intelligence, and the entire Congress passed it, and provided the funding to actually do an objective investigation, get that information, and get it back to the appropriate oversight people in the United States government. Well, it was completely, that whole purpose was subverted. Previous efforts like that have been subverted, that we can document, all the way back to when Bigelow Aerospace got $22 million, back when Harry Reid was head of the majority leader of the Senate, and the General Herbert, who was side by side with Senator Reid, who was overseeing that whole operation, contacted me a couple years ago and said, look, we spent all that money, we didn't get anything back. I said, well, you should have just come to us. We already have all the testimony documents, and we're the blacks, and we have that. I've had this information for decades. So what has happened is that the way they maneuver is when there's an initiative starts happening, this covert group then puts these foxes in the henhouse. They're really, they're more, a better analogy, they're wolves in sheep's clothing that are embedded in those operations, who then basically make it go to a dead end. Nothing comes out of it. That's what happened with that investigation years ago that went through Bigelow Aerospace. Is what's happened so far with Arrow. This is why people who have had involvement with this become very skeptical of the government managing this properly, because they don't have a proper manager in there who knows how this game is played. So the best we can do is to advise them of this historical pattern, and that historical pattern, so far, is continuing to this moment. Now, we may have a change happening there. There's been a changing of the guard at Arrow. There's a changing of the guard of people who are now realizing they were. I know that I have a letter from the chair and co-chair of Senate Intelligence pretty much reprimanding Arrow for some of this. So I'm hoping that we're going to open a new chapter here now, and it looks like we are, actually. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but that still doesn't answer the question. If you have a global operation that's entrenched, highly integrated, that is this sort of global operation dealing with secret technologies and secret operations targeting NHI craft, ET craft, how do you get that under control? You can offer a period of amnesty and immunity and protections, but what if there are hardliners that say, no, we're going to stay on this path because we're holding all the cards, right? In terms of technology, because the mainstream U.S. government that you and I call the government have, a B-2 stealth bomber and helicopters and things like this. And this organization have things that can go to space and back. They have technologies that allow for teleporting. They do. They have the most unbelievable technologies. And so that organization is really holding all the technology cards. And that's dangerous. And how do you fix that? I'm not trying to put this in a negative light. I'm just saying we got a lot of work to do. Because the acknowledgement, what I'm saying now is that full disclosure that needs to happen is going to happen just with these whistleblowers. That's more like proof and acknowledgement of what we know already, but it's proven. Real disclosure happens when the governments here and around the world of we the people come together and get those operations under control, and we take those swords and turn them into the plowshares of a new civilization. I know this is Mr. Barber's intention. He wants to see this transition happen, and instead of dwelling on the past, go forward. But to go forward, somehow you've got to put on a leash the most malevolent aspects of these covert programs that are entrenched hardliners. So to unpack this a little further, there are a certain number of people in that system wanting to get out of it, right? They need a glide path out. They need immunity, they need protection, and they need to cooperate. Now, I think the only way they should get, let's say, immunity for anything they may have done in the past, which some of it's pretty terrible, is that they would be have to come clean and then unpack to the authorities the entire architecture, locations, and operational details of those secret government programs that are not being run legally. That should be the requirement of receiving blanket immunity. And then they should then be protected. Now, I've said before, there's a chairman of a major U.S. corporation that's reached out to me. But it was made clear to him that they would kill him and his entire family. So, and this has been going on back and forth with this gentleman for about a year and a half now. And to be honest, neither the Congress nor the White House have instituted measures that I think would be pro forma if they understood what the implications were, and that this threat matrix, let's call it, against good patriotic people when they come forward is real, it's palpable, the fear is palpable. And remember, I have personally spent time with hundreds of men and women like that, and the fear is palpable. And so one of my frustrations moving into this now for my 35th year is that the United States government needs to learn to move on this with alacrity and speed and efficiency. But to do that, it's a very deep dive into this information, because without the knowledge, you can't even make a path forward, right? And none of them have had time to do that. This is one of my problems when I meet with members of Congress, and they're busy with a million other things. And to their defense, every time they've asked for a special budget, whether it was from the Senate Intelligence Committee or the House Oversight, to get staffed up to really drill down on this, that money was ripped out of the budget by some bad actors in the Congress, and we know who they are. So this then puts it, unless that dynamic changes, and it might. I mean, we just had the Speaker of the House remove the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Turner, who was one of the key people who blocked the National Defense Authorization Act provisions that would have provided amnesty or safe harbor for these whistleblowers. So it could be that process is going on. I was happy to see that. But at the same time, you have some, I can't talk about some of the inside ball going on right now in shuffling, but it's not completely clean. All right. Let's just say there are bad actors in the Congress who can make a lot of trouble for things going forward. So then you have the judicial branch won't do much with this at this stage, later perhaps. But the chief executive is the president. So the president, through executive orders and through also the actions from an attorney general and Department of Justice, could really get to the bottom of this and authorize a proper staffed investigation, a proper response to hardliners who do not cooperate with this transition peacefully to proper oversight of these operations and covert programs. And that a team of people need to be put together to really take a hard look at where our vulnerabilities are. Our biggest vulnerability, I'll tell you right now, is this organization using those advanced technologies to stir up all manner of trouble, to start a war here, to look like an alien invasion there. There's that guy Ross, I can't pronounce his last name, who's with that News Nation. How do you say his Catholic? I've met him before, but
Coulthard.
Yeah, something like that. I have to get the pronunciation right on that. When the episode that he did on drones that had this little clip of Mr. Barber in it, he went on and on about the drones. They have to be alien. Well, here's some very bad news. They aren't. It's good news and bad news. The bad news part of it is that some of these are just obviously drones, very clunky. There's some other weird things going on with orbs and spheres and energy fields and weird fog, whatever stuff. Every one of those phenomena, all of them, all of that phenomena, we have the capabilities to hoax as humans. Now, let me go back to what head of the Lockheed Skunk Works said in 1995 on his deathbed. Anything you can imagine, we've already done at the Skunk Works, and it's not out at Area 51, it's out there. Now, I've been to that site, and I'll tell you that whatever you imagine in terms of technological capability, it's more than that. It's way more than that, and it crosses not only in terms of energy and propulsion, but sort of interdimensional phenomenon, systems that are interfacing with consciousness and thought and all kinds of issues. So now all those technologies could also be repurposed to healing, gathering knowledge, scientific investigation, travel, clean energy, using very advanced technology to reverse the damage we've already done to the Earth. That is possible with these technologies. So there's a huge technological payday and a big leap forward for humanity if it's used for good purposes. But currently, these technologies are in the hands of people who are more about consolidating power through fear and manipulation. And that is the big change that has to happen from these programs that have been running amok since the late 1950s. So, one of the things that I love is this sort of thing. Now, this is just a page out of the briefing document for the president and members of Congress. It's 320 some pages, something. And this has an illustration, and you'll see on the left side ET craft, and on the right the man-made ones. And we have several pages of these. The reason we put that in there is because most people, even if you're fairly close up, if you don't know what to look for, you're going to think an object is alien or NHI craft, non-human intelligence craft, when it's actually came out of the Raytheon, or it came out of the Lockheed Skunk Works or Northrop Grumman. And if you look at the illustrations that we have from our whistleblower, TE, who was on a retrieval team, his first retrievals were UFOs, UAPs, that were these triangular objects that were from Northrop Grumman and Raytheon. They were not alien or NHI at all. So this we have known now for a very, very long time. But what we have found is that there are certain people out there who are embedded counterintelligence officers and disinformation functionaries who go to members of Congress or White House people or the media and say, we don't have anything like that. Therefore, anything that looks alien is alien. And that then opens the door to all the staged false alien events that are scary to be rubber stamped as NHI alien when it's not. And it absolutely isn't. That is the biggest part of the secrecy. And I think that is why, if you look at the testimony, we can show the illustration of this big 300-foot diameter craft. that the Marine platoon member back in 2009 encountered in Indonesia, Michael Herrera. And if you look at that craft, and I don't have it here in front of me, but that thing was 300 feet across. It was manned. And the way it left after they were almost killed, they were packaging up humans in crates to use in human experimentation back home. And these were Americans who were like mercenary type guys operating this 300-foot diameter craft. The way it left, it was like a spark off a flying wheel. It went up. It was a little bit of transformer sound, like humming. Went up and then boom, over the horizon in a couple seconds at 100,000 miles per hour, something like that. Now, that was in 2009. And that craft, if it came over Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles, 99.999999999 out to how many decibels, percentage of the population say it's an alien craft. So that's why people like Ross will see these images and go, it's got the alien. Because they haven't gotten the information accurately. It's a research failure on their part. That we have technologies, and however far advanced you think it is, as I said a moment ago, it's way more. I mean, it's orders of magnitude more. And I do want to say this. I have met more than one top secret scientist who lives and breathes in SCIFs, secure compartmented information facilities, or STIFs, subterranean facilities, underground. Some people call them DUMBs, deep underground military bases. And those are guys who are often plucked out of high school and college, who have IQs north of 200, who are absolute engineering and physics geniuses. And they live most of their life working on these projects in a compartmented operation. So you're also dealing with some of the great geniuses of the last 70 years, and nobody knows their name. They're not the people who worked on, my uncle worked on the lunar module with Northrop Grumman that landed on the moon in 1969. Carried Neil Armstrong there. But these are the people, he was very bright, but these are people who are extraordinary, and they are pulled into those operations. So you not only have illegal black budget funding, and you have something to study that's an actual extraterrestrial device. You then have a brain trust. I would call it a brain drain for general society, because it's all covert and illegally covert. Really brilliant scientists, and there's some of the most stunningly brilliant minds I've ever met, unfortunately, are being wasted working in these covert programs that are benefiting not humanity one bit. It's actually hurting humanity. So that's another, let's call it peace dividend or disclosure dividend, is that if you have that kind of resources, both intellectual and manpower, but also financial, to bend the sword into a plowshare of free energy, or as a doctor, things I've seen and heard about that could do amazing technologies for healing and repairing trauma and all kinds of advanced technologies. We would really, in 20 years, have a civilization that would faintly resemble this one. It would be so advanced. And this is, how you lift humanity out of the great poverty it's in, but also turns away from cannibalizing the earth by destroying the earth with technologies from the 1800s, fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, and then nuclear. Wind and solar doesn't have the energy density to fix the problem. We covered that in The Lost Century. You should go all look at The Lost Century, that documentary. You can now see it on Tubi and some other places. So I think that when we look at this, there's a beautiful new world coming, but there are these problems that you have to take care of. Now, there are going to be a lot of people who want to whistle past that graveyard, and I think that's dangerous. It's a little bit saying, I want to add a whole new beautiful addition to my house, but this whole part of it that's part of that house has the roof off, it's leaking, the whole structure's about to fall in, right? You have to do both, because we're now 70, 80 years into an era of secrecy, that's been a mistake. Everyone now acknowledges that. How do we get out of that with it not being kinetic or violent? So we think it can be done. And I'm a man of peace, but I'm also not someone that thinks you let people just run amok doing the things they've been doing, because things they've been doing include kidnapping, abductions, targeted killings, murder, embezzlement, intimidation, bribery, blackmail, control of freedoms through the internet and media, where people are censored, and on and on and on. This is all related to an attempt to institute a global, sort of more totalitarian superstate. And the way they can do that is by pointing to a threat from outer space. And this is why my friend Carol Raza and I were talking last night. And she had worked with Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler. In the last years of his life, he said, they're going to hoax a threat. They're going to send, objects that are going to look alien, and they're not. This is 1974, 50 years ago. And he said, it's all a lie, but that's how they can consolidate power. And that's always been the long-term plan since the 50s. So the only way that doesn't happen is that our eyes are wide open. Like we just pull the curtain back on the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain, pulling all the levers, scaring the hell out of everyone, and say, that's a psyop. It's a psychological warfare operation. Oh, that device that did that is, and those creatures on that device are exactly what's in the Jacques Vallée CIA document that he's afraid to release, but that he summarized in his book in 1992, and that they were engaging in abductions for
Dr.
warfare value.
I just to add to that, and I mean no disrespect to Jacques Vallée. He's a lovely guy. I got the privilege of spending a lot of time with him.
Yes.
But when I reached out in 2021 and very respectfully requested that document so we could include it in the Cosmic Hoax, he totally flipped out and became irate and said that I was everything that was wrong with this field, and so it was a reaction that made no sense to me. And I'm not a mind reader, but I got the impression from that reaction that he was scared, that he was genuinely frightened.
Sure, absolutely. And remember, the mechanism whereby he received that document was because in the 80s he began to associate with some unsavory people who were part of that deep illegal programs legacy. And that's doubtlessly how he acquired that document. And so to disclose it, it could cost him his life. Who knows? I mean, look, people think this is some kind of conspiracy theory. It's not. It's just a criminal conspiracy. And, there was something called the mafia, or it is. And they did have hitmen that did kill people who would blow the whistle on them. For all the people who say all of this is a conspiracy theory, you're about to have the wake up of your life in the next couple of months. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, there's a reason we have RICO.
Yeah. Exactly. Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization, RICO, was exactly created by the U.S. Congress and signed into law by the president to take on these complex criminal organizations. Well, what I'm describing has been the largest transnational criminal organization in the known history of humanity. I am not overstating that. Now, I'm hoping, and I know that this is the hope of the people coming forward. They've been special forces at these black sites. They have not been the people in the C-suite, the executive suites, and special programs directors at Lockheed or Northrop or Raytheon or whoever. General Electric, Booz Allen Hamilton, SAIC. These are all have compartmented special programs that deal with this. And similarly, the parallel to that is integrated with that are similar programs that are in military and intelligence units, and then in policy positions where they have embedded operatives, whether they be in Congress or in the permanent bureaucracy of the CIA or Pentagon or NSA. So all of that is there. It has to be investigated. That has to get under proper control, and there has to be a stick and there has to be a carrot here. And the carrot is you can be exonerated, you can be, get immunity, you can get protection, but you got to come completely clean. So if you're writing down, that's what's in this, it has to be in an executive order or something that the Department of Justice would do. Now, it's a bigger problem. I don't want to overly complicate this. When you go OCONUS outside the continental United States, now it's another whole discussion because you have these operations. For example, we have the whistleblower who last year in the summer 2023, Mr. Hecker, who was down at the South Pole working for Raytheon and described this huge neutrino light array technology a mile under the ice at the South Pole. That is not only a tracking system for the Earth and space, but a weapon system. Now, that's there. Now, that's not on U.S. soil. And similarly, we have a whistleblower who came forward in the first disclosure project effort in 2001, who was at the facility at a base near the Bolivian-Peruvian border when we knocked down an ET craft and it crashed, and he and his sergeant were like the first people there. And he was told, if you talked about this, we'll throw you out of a helicopter and you'll be killed. Very similar to what Michael Herrera was told in 2009. But this was back, I believe, in the 80s. And you can read his account in our archive. And those sort of places exist on every continent. And they exist in the oceans. And they exist in the Arctic and at the South Pole. And they exist on and on and on and on. So this is why I keep saying that this is going to have to quickly go from a U.S. disclosure and operation to a global one. And for that, you're going to have a certain détente and rapprochement with a lot of world leaders, whether they are viewed as adversaries or not. But on this issue, they all need to be in a coalition to secure the peace, to cease and desist from targeting and destroying extraterrestrial craft and people, and to create a global outreach like the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, but a global official outreach from humans, not just one nation, but all of humanity, to these extraterrestrial civilizations and extend a side of ourselves that is our higher angels, let's say, instead of just a warmongering bunch of apes running around killing everything we don't understand. Let's begin to act like a civilized people. And instead of shooting first and asking questions later, let's try to reach out to these civilizations and the NHI peoples and say, why are you here? How can we help? A normal dialogue. See, we've been doing that with CE5 Contact. You can see on our app store, you can get the whole training program to be sort of a citizen ambassador to these civilizations. But if you look at this and look at it closely, there has never been, except for a brief moment in France, the French initiative, I call it, the French connection, back in the mid-2000s, when President Sarkozy...
Don't call it the French connection.
I know. I'm joking. So, but, the French really did want to move on that path, but it didn't last very long. Sarkozy left office, and the top Ministry of Defense people there moved on after our initial demonstration of CE5 Contact for the French government. But there have been initiatives wanting to do this. I know the Minister of Defense, Paul Hellyer, back in the first Trudeau administration, when he was MOD head, he wanted to have a place to make peaceful contact with these ETs. He even wanted to create a special diplomatic port in Canada to do that. He told me all about it. It was amazing. That would have been 60s, 70s. I don't know when the first Trudeau was around. And the Honorable Paul Hellyer described this to me in some detail. And I thought, wow, visionary. But now that this is coming out, and I think it's going to get more and more officially confirmed, what I'm trying to get people prepared for is now what's next, right? Let's get all this out. It'll be a few months. Let's see how it goes. But we need to be mindful. Our eye needs to be on the prize, not necessarily just the process sausage making. And the prize is making a pathway forward to create a new civilization on Earth that'll be amazing, beautiful, transformed, but also to get stood down these malicious influences that have been doing these dangerous actions, targeting and downing ET craft and NHI craft. And then instead of doing that, create a global peace initiative. And for that, what Carol Rosin has talked about for years, and apparently 40 nations are ready to sign this document. That's a space peace treaty to keep all weapons out of space, and to not use space as a theater of weapon deployment, either on other bodies or on craft or what have you. And that apparently, this is what I'm told, is that both Russia and China and 30 some other countries are ready to sign that. And so that should be done, and it should then extend to the entire world, where there's a peaceful, cooperative effort to approach all of this within the framework of the original concepts of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, CE5 contact, like we have in that app, where it's based on the fact that while they're not human, they're conscious and they're sentient. And so at a profound level of what it means to be a being, a sentient, awake being, they're people. They may not be Homo sapien people, but they're still conscious beings. And that acknowledgement of the light of awareness, that this field consciousness, you can call it spirit, I guess religious people say the Holy Spirit, that permeates all places and all things and allows us to be conscious. That's our point of unity. And it's never going to be through our various differences. It's going to be finding what is our point of oneness. Where is that singularity? And the real singularity that we need to begin to understand as a people to move this whole civilization forward, whether it's fighting each other over religions or economic systems or territory, race, whatever it is. We need to go beyond our differences and find our point of commonality, where we intersect as one. But we can't just do it on a humanistic level, because now we're dealing with civilizations from other worlds, NHI. And we have to understand that they're conscious and they're intelligent. So the conscious intelligence itself, the stuff that is what we call mind, which transcends the disciplines of organized religion or what have you, that's universal. So the foundation for, let's call it not just world peace, but universal peace, is going to be this great peace that is based on a deeper understanding of who and what we are. I know I'm pivoting to a little bit of a spiritual or social conversation now, but that's got to be the foundation of how we approach these civilizations, instead of saying, oh, they look different, they act different, their intellects are different, everything's different, let's go kill them. That's the sort of tribal monkey brain of the original sin of humanity. This is why we all are in endless wars, is that we've never been able to transcend and go beyond our differences and find the point of peaceful oneness. Now, I guess when we were using clubs and arrows and even muskets or tanks, it wasn't pretty. But now we have technologies that can destroy entire worlds, right? Whether they be thermonuclear or these advanced technologies reverse engineered from advanced ET craft, NHI craft. So we're at a point that's actually an existential crisis, where part of that solution, or all the things we've talked about, a big part of it has got to be our evolving in our understanding of what it means to be a conscious, sentient being. It's not just humans now, it's others as well.
That's beautiful. I think that's a perfect note to end on today.
Yep.
Obviously, we're going to keep our eyes on what's coming out from News Nation on Saturday. and
Oh, yes.
we will release another podcast right after that to get your analysis.
Yes, and one comment about that, just so people know, I know what that team has. But I'm not in possession of it. They're in possession of it in their own OPSEC, operational security, and they're going to release it in a way that they feel is safe for all of them. And then they're going to measure the response. So that's why each time this evolves, I'm going to want to speak to all of you who are listening and try to explain what that means, and then also to counter any inadvertent misinformation that comes out, like did yesterday about the drones, and Ross saying that those are got to be alien, and that's an understandable position, but that's dangerous because this is a field where a little knowledge is an extremely dangerous thing, and if you don't know what the capabilities are within covert aerospace engineering programs and how those could be deployed to deceive people, you're going to get tricked. And we can't afford that right now. That's exactly what we need to avoid. We need clarity on this, not misinformation. So that's why I'm going to be continuing to do these podcasts, is to try to shed some light to the best of my ability, having researched this for a very long time, and been in some places where I know what we have. And how it has been used and could be used. Because I think a vigilant citizenry and an aware citizenry, as President Eisenhower say, is essential. But it's also true that we have to be, in a sense, people who advocate and ask our leaders to get a deeper grasp of this so that they make the correct decisions for our nation and humanity.